The Great Dictator, written and directed by Charlie Chaplin, who also plays the two lead roles in the film, a humble Jewish hairdresser living in a ghetto, and the power-hungry dictator Hynkel, based, of course, on Hitler. The black and white film is considered to be an absolute classic for good reason, but it's also a really interesting picture from the historical perspective, and I think for two main reasons. One, it was the first movie Charlie Chaplin made in a good couple of years, and it's also the first one that has sound for the entirety of its runtime. Previously, he only worked for on either silent movies or ones that only had sound for a couple of scenes, so this was something completely new from him. And it ended up being his only film ever to get Oscar nominated in five categories, although it failed to win in any of them. The second reason is that after having seen it, I think it's really unique in terms of being made in the only short window of time that it could have been made. Because Chaplin made the film when Hitler was already well known around the world, and the movie was actually finished when the Second World War was already started, but he was not yet universally condemned and considered to be a straightforward villain, especially because the extent of persecution and atrocities committed against the Jewish people were not yet public knowledge at the time. As a result, it almost feels weird to watch the film now because for the majority of its runtime, it's a mostly slapstick comedy that laughs at the Nazis and shows them as incompetent and dumb rather than immoral and vile. There are undertones of seriousness, especially in the ghetto scenes, with Jews increasingly fearing for their well-being, but the material is not yet informed by all the stuff that was actually going on. Chaplin himself admitted after the war that had he known about the concentration camps and the genocidal tendencies of the Nazi party, he probably wouldn't have made the film, or at least wouldn't have made it this way, laughing at Hitler as a clumsy little man. Fortunately, he did. Fortunately, because we now get to go back and have this piece of cinema which approaches this subject from a slightly different, much less reverential position than any of the similar later works. I think it really makes you think about politics from a shifted perspective. You get to see criticism of Hitler from a time, criticism and satire of Hitler from a time when that wasn't the universally accepted position. Hell, at the time, a number of people in the US actually supported Nazi Germany and opposed going to war against them. So the film was kind of controversial upon its release in that way. It's interesting, especially nowadays, because you can relate to this with what's going on in China and the current lack of action on the side of the so-called Western world. The subject matter forces you to think, is this what's happening again? Are we at that period again where we're making satire about, in this case, Xi Jinping being Winnie the Pooh, but years from now we'll look back at these times and wonder how he and his government were allowed to commit all those atrocities? How did people not react earlier? Philosophical implications aside, The Great Dictator is at its core a pretty good comedy. The slapstick humor combined with well-written lines make for a great political satire. In technical terms, it's impressive to see how much was already possible in terms of the cinematic magic 80 years ago. And of course, Charlie Chaplin himself is excellent in both roles. The highlight of the performances would, of course, be the ending speech that he gives, which became sort of a legendary movie scene, deservedly. It's well written and fantastically delivered, but and I think it's very important that it was included because it kind of shifts the tone of the film towards the very end. It says, listen, we had a few good laughs for the past 2 hours. It's been fun, but there's something important we have to say here. This kind of uplifting message, this call to resist the rule of evil man, machine man. It's a message of hope, but it's also a call to action, a reminder that as funny as these people may be, they are also dangerous to us all, and that we do best to remember and uphold our basic humanity, which I think is a reminder that we could all use today.